Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people here joining us online today for the launch of VCOSS's new report, Collaboration for Disaster Resilience. I'd like to start today's session by acknowledging that we are meeting on unceded Aboriginal land. I'm in the northern suburbs of Melbourne today on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land, and I'd like to acknowledge elders and ancestors of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and to extend that respect and acknowledgement to all traditional owners of the lands that we all are meeting on for this event today. And also to acknowledge any First Nations people who may be joining us today. First Nations people have a long history of caring for country and dealing with events, including disasters on this country as the oldest continuing culture in the world. We have a lot to learn from Indigenous ways of collaborating, caring for country, and doing, being and knowing. And it is a privilege here at VCOSS to work alongside Aboriginal community members and Aboriginal community controlled organisations in the work that we do. In a moment, I will introduce our panelists who are here to talk about this important topic and to launch this very important report. And I'm pleased that in our lineup of speakers, we'll be hearing insights today from a range of organisations that mirror the central messages of this report. And I'll quote briefly from the executive summary of the report. All systems and actors involved in disaster management are motivated by the goal of mitigating harm and building resilience. But to build a more resilient society in which all Victorians can thrive, the way that these systems work together matters. Research tells us that a shared responsibility approach is foundational to effective emergency management policy. The speakers with us today represent the cross-organisational breadth that's needed for an effective shared responsibility approach. They know, as do many of you in the audience, how critical the interface is between different system actors in disaster management. And that includes emergency management services, all levels of government, and vitally, community organisations. I think there can sometimes be a preconception of community organisations as fundamentally sort of friendly places that provide soft services, like arts and crafts. Absolutely no shade on arts and crafts. I'm personally a big arts and crafts person, love it. But increasingly, and especially in specific place-based context, community organisations are on the front line of the worst of times. They can help people prepare for, survive, and recover from quite devastating events, disastrous events. And they build community resilience to withstand these recurring disasters that will get more frequent and intense as our climate changes. Our sector is broad and diverse in terms of the services they offer, their size and scope, and operational imperatives. But what unites community organisations is there in the name. They are embedded in communities, in local geographies, and leveraging local knowledges. This is their superpower when it comes to spearheading collaborations for disaster resilience. I'd like to again quote from the report. Community organisations play a key role in collaborations for disaster resilience due to their trusted role in the community. The community sector provides support that knits together to form a safety net for Victorians who are most impacted by emergencies. The people and communities most impacted are often those who experience compounding disasters and also other compounding disadvantages. Poverty forces people to live in disaster-prone areas and reduces their options of risk reduction and escape. Disability increases people's complexity during disasters as do other factors such as age, isolation, linguistic or digital exclusion. So we need to know people's specific local needs, and that happens through the deep community knowledge and relationships that community-based organisations can generate. Knowing how to operationalise the knowledge and relationships and leadership at the local level requires productive, long-standing collaborations between emergency management professionals in a range of settings. I'm now pleased to pass on to Lucy Mann, our Disaster Resilience Policy Advisor here at VCOSS, who'll give an overview of the report findings and introduce our guest speakers today. Thanks, Lucy.
Great. Thank you, Juanita. Just setting up screen share here, and thank you all for being here. And I'd also like to add my acknowledgement that I'm here on unceded Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land and pay my respects to elders, past and present. So I'm going to give just a brief overview of top-line findings and recommendations from the report. And so, as we know, in recent years, Victoria has experienced some of the most devastating disasters in our post-colonial history. And in response, there has been a real wealth of examples of collaborations that have emerged between the emergency management sector, government, communities, and community organisations. And there's been this continued focus on what shared responsibility for emergencies means in the face of a changing climate and the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what we were aiming to do with this report was firstly to capture some lessons from these collaborations across Victoria, including the outcomes of collaborations and the challenges encountered, to identify what are the underpinning enablers of collaboration across these sectors, and then explore actions that can be taken to strengthen enablers, including practices being used by collaborations as well as policy recommendations. And this report is a project of the Community Connector for Resilience, which is supported by the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. And this report itself was a collaboration, and I'd like to thank everyone who took part in this research. And the research included a literature review, development of 6 case studies, and interviews with individuals from 19 organisations, which you can see on the screen. And I also want to acknowledge that this report presents just a very small snapshot of the collaborative work happening across the state, and I know that many of you on this webinar are involved in additional collaborations to build disaster resilience. As mentioned, this report showcases 6 case studies, and these are the Climate Partnerships Project, the Emergency Planning Advice Service, which we'll hear more about today on the panel, the Gippsland Lakes Complete Health Emergency Recovery Program, which we'll also hear more about as part of the panel, the Mornington Peninsula Resilience Relief and Recovery Network, the Mount Alexander Connectors Program, and the Multicultural Community Engagement Network, which again is going to be featured on our panel today. And so we know that collaboration is powerful, and it can also be challenging. So it requires moving away from traditional systems of command and control, investing in work that sometimes can seem intangible from the outside, and bridging different approaches and power dynamics across organisations and sectors. But the reason so much effort does go into collaborations is ultimately that it works, and this is how we can build a fairer and more resilient society. And this was really borne out in the research, with the case studies demonstrating several positive outcomes, which I'll briefly outline now. And so the first outcome we found is that collaboration supports people at higher risk or with more complex needs. And so we know it takes teamwork to address complexities that a disaster may present when a disaster is combined with structural barriers and injustice. So collaborations for disaster resilience do this by bringing lived experience and community sector expertise to enhance emergency management systems. And so as one example from the report, the Mornington Peninsula Resilience Relief and Recovery Network has enabled a rapid deployment of multiple services for community members during emergencies, including older residents and people experiencing family violence. The second outcome that we found is that collaboration means we can achieve more together than we could alone. And this is particularly important when we consider climate-driven disasters becoming more frequent and severe. There is a paradox here, which is that often the work of collaborations can feel intangible because it involves significant investment in relationships that are not transactional in nature. But in the long run, participants in the research saw that this creates huge opportunities to pool resources and achieve outcomes that couldn't be achieved when working alone. A third positive outcome that we saw is that collaborations have influenced emergency management and government policy by providing real-time insights and intelligence on local needs. So we'll hear more from Silva about the Multicultural Community Engagement Network shortly. And during the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, this network was able to provide multicultural communities in Southeast Melbourne with a way to advise government on the best approaches for their communities and then see results of this as approaches were able to adapt. And finally, we found that the role of communities and community organisations involved in collaborations is often to bring a long-term perspective on how to build resilience through a strengths-based and community development approach, and then to embed this approach through all phases of emergency management. And the research identified 4 key underlying enablers that was underneath the success of the case studies. And so for each enabler, we identified common practices that were utilised within. And I will just highlight one practice and one recommendation from each. Apologies everyone, I've just lost the screen share. I'll just bring it back up now. Great, you should all be able to see that again. Apologies everyone, I just had an unstable internet connection notification. So I'll just try one more time to bring up those slides. Okay, great. And I might just check with Amy that those are showing correctly.
Yep, they look great, Lucy.
Okay, perfect. And great. So the first enabler that we identified is strong ongoing relationships that span sectors and jurisdictions. And so many of the people we interviewed spoke about how the real glue of successful collaborations is genuine personal relationships that go beyond formal collaborations, and that the outcomes can come from being able to just pick up the phone and ask for help when needed. And this requires substantial investment of time to build those connections and ensure that everyone understands the role that they are playing, and also the investment in building trust, inclusion, and cultural safety. And one key practice to highlight here is how important it can be to see relationships as an outcome in themselves, not just as a means to an end. So practically, this can look like writing this as an outcome into funding applications and reporting and measuring relationships formed through these projects. And a key policy recommendation to support this enabler is to fund an ongoing disaster resilience workforce in the community sector. So many interviewees spoke about how because it leads to staff turnover, making it harder to build long-standing relationships. And the benefit of an ongoing workforce would be the ability not only to collaborate, but also work on resilience and preparedness between disasters. So the next enabler we identified is local place-based leadership, which we know is essential because local organisations and prepare effectively within their local community. And this goes beyond And this goes beyond participation of local organisations' emergency management arrangements, and it requires shifting power downwards so that decision-making happens at the most local level possible. Practices by collaborations to support local leadership included looking at ways to respond and be accountable to local priorities, even when those priorities may not fit within the original purpose of the collaboration. And so, for example, in one case study, a focus on rough sleepers, the network, and the network was able to expand to do work in this area. So this really requires significant flexibility by conveners as well as funders. And a key policy recommendation here is to increase resourcing for place-based organisations, including Aboriginal community-controlled organisations and community sector organisations. And it's critical here that this resourcing supports self-determination for Aboriginal communities and resilience building. And a third enabler we identified is focusing on all phases of the cycle of resilience. And particularly, there was a desire from participants in the research to focus more on preparedness between disasters. And one practice here is designing collaborations from the outset to be fit for purpose across all phases of disasters. So for instance, the case studies in the report that were initially focused on response and recovery on preparedness when the community was ready, and then collaborations focused on long-term resilience have been set up to transition into response and recovery committees when emergencies arise. A final enabler we identified is ensuring that collaborations have a clear purpose and theory of change created by and for communities. So many participants in the research spoke about how a sense of shared purpose and collective action is needed in lines and organisational structures to keep momentum going. And co-design from community members themselves is a really important practice here and goes hand in hand with accountability to community. And a final recommendation to highlight is the role of long-term and flexible funding agreements so that co-design process can be funded, and then there's flexibility within the project to address what emerges through that co-design process. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there and I'll hand back to Juanita to introduce the panel.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Great to see, great to have a bit of an overview of the report and a great introduction to the conversation that we're now going to have with our guest speakers, who I'd like to warmly welcome to this session online today. Just a quick note for people on the webinar: you can ask questions of the panelists at any time by popping those questions in the Q&A panel or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So please don't wait or hesitate to pop in a question, and we'll get to questions after some initial observations and reflections from our three speakers. So firstly, we have Silva Nazaritian, who is the director of Enliven Victoria, which is a part of EACH. With the purpose of delivering health and support services that improve lives and strengthen communities, Enliven Victoria focuses on the three streams of community engagement, plain language, and planetary health. Now, Silva's field of interest in particular is preventative health and health promotion, and she is passionate about working alongside community to promote public health. She has extensive experience working with multicultural communities in the Southern region and was highly commended in the Victorian Multicultural Commission Award for Excellence in Health in 2023. So welcome, Silva. Next, also we have Angela Cook, who has worked in the CFA's Community Preparedness Program for over 18 years. Angela has a background in community development, community safety program design, and development and inclusion. With a passion for human rights, Angela now focuses on improving fire preparedness and safety for people at higher risk, alongside Kelly Stoner. Between 2020 and 2024, Kelly and Angela co-developed and co-piloted a person-centered household fire and emergency planning service with Red Cross. The service targets people who need extra support. Both Angela and Kelly are recipients of the National AFAC Fostering Resilient Communities Award in 2023, recognising their work in improving disability-inclusive disaster risk reduction. Welcome, Angela. We look forward to hearing from you too. And finally, we have Amanda Howard. Amanda is the Manager of Emergency Recovery Support at Gippsland Lakes Complete Health, or GLCH. Amanda has worked for GLCH for over 13 years and has extensive experience in disaster recovery, having been a lead in the Emergency Recovery Support Team since its inception in 2020. As an East Gippsland local, Amanda has had many first-hand lived experiences of natural disasters and also has experience as a first responder. In her previous role as a forestry officer, she fought many bushfires in the East Gippsland region. GLCH has offered case support for people who were impacted by the Black Summer fires of 2019 to 20, the Victorian floods in 2022, and the February 2024 storm event. An absolute wealth of experience on this panel today, and I'd love to start by asking each of our panelists, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your collaborative project or case study? And can you also tell us how you see the importance of collaboration for disaster resilience? I might start with you, Silva.
Thank you so much, Yanita, for the opportunity to join my fellow panel members to take part in this important event and discussion. I'm on Boonwurrung land and would like to pay my respect to the elders past and present. So Yanita, I'm the Director of Enliven Victoria. We are a part of each, as you mentioned, focusing on delivering programs in three streams of service: community engagement, plain language and planetary health. Specifically, the Multicultural Community Engagement Network, which was showcased in the report, was formerly known as the Southeast Call Partnership by Cultural Worker and Community Champion Network. It was formed in 2020, and it was a partnership between the City of Casey, City of Greater Dandenong, Cardinia Shire and Enliven, with Enliven providing the backbone support. It was a place-based response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And really the aim of the network was to work alongside community leaders and community champions to disseminate information to community, provide a platform for communication between community leaders and government, and to also deliver support initiatives which were culturally appropriate. And we were very pleased that through this initiative, the network reached approximately 18,000 people through 431 COVID-19 vaccine information sessions and published over 14,000 communication initiatives in multiple languages. Of course, given the success of the network and since COVID, we were very motivated and saw the great strength in continuing the network, and it has since grown to respond to community needs, not only COVID, but in other areas as well. So we deliver projects focused on mental, physical, social, economic and environmental health and well-being. And of course, we always welcome new members. So I'm very happy to share the link in the chat box for anyone that may be interested in joining. I think this project really highlights the importance of collaboration, which really allows for that understanding of the nuances within each community, and helps to really formulate an appropriate and timely response, particularly to the disasters, as well as disaster response, as well as disaster resilience support. So thank you, Yanni.
Thanks so much, Silva. Great to get a sense of your role and your organisation in the work that you've been doing. Angela, can I ask you for some initial reflections?
Sure. Well, I think I'm going to learn a lot today from the other panelists. So I'm very grateful to be here today. Thanks, Silva and Amanda and VCOSS for having me. I'm Angela Cook from CFA, and I live on beautiful Tanarong country near Mansfield. And I just like to pay my respects to Tanarong elders, past and present. Now, I've been very privileged to work in disability inclusive disaster risk reduction, it's a mouthful, for the past 5 years. Now, CFA and Red Cross, as you heard one after mention, we decided to work together. It was back in 2019. So it was pre-COVID, Silva. So it all sounded, the dream sounded very tangible. And we wanted to work together at the time to deliver a preparedness support service at the household level, really targeting those people in the community who require some extra support. So that might mean because they have a permanent or significant disability, or people who are older and need some support to remain living at home. Well, we were, of course, a little delayed thanks to, in our original dream, thanks to the pandemic. But we stayed the course and co-created the Emergency Planning Advice Service as a pilot alongside Red Cross. And we have piloted it now in about 9 LGAs alongside local government. And it's definitely taught me the importance of collaboration for disaster resilience, absolutely. So very pleased to have this report, because I think the enablers ring true for the work we've been doing. I think what it is we know, like the quote said on the screen before, no one person or agency or sector can address, I think, the challenges that some people with a disability really face in disaster situations. So if I think of, I'm just going to think of Jill, that's not her real name. She lives on her own. She's aging with some mobility challenges in her life. She doesn't drive any longer. She has no transport, and she lives in an extreme bushfire risk area. She also has pets, a number of pets that she would never leave behind. So through the Emergency Planning Advice Service, we work together to brainstorm solutions alongside the service provider. It's very unique in this way. It was the emergency services alongside the service provider, with Jill sitting around talking together to find some solutions. So it was great. The service provider found a taxi who'd take all the pets in the taxi. I can't hear all the cheers there, but I'm sure there will be out there in the crowd. And CFA helped the provider learn about the importance of leaving early and where is a good place for Jill to go. And Red Cross really brought the skills in psychological first aid, which meant Jill felt in control of her preparedness journey. And so this is why collaboration matters. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Angela. And finally, Amanda.
Yep, hi, I'm Amanda, and I would like to acknowledge the Gunai-Kurnai people on the lands where I sit and pay my respects to the elders past and present as well. Our collaborations for our program come about a little bit differently because we were stood up after the disaster of the Black Summer fires, but the collaboration between us and ERV, Anglicare Financial Counselling, Gippsland Community Legal Service was really vital to get outcomes for our clients. So that's where our collaboration comes from, and the work we've done across multiple disasters has shown the importance of that collaboration.
Fantastic, Amanda, and we look forward to hearing a little bit more about those collaborations as we dive into some more questions. And just a reminder to everyone online, please do pop your questions into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We welcome those, and I'm sure the panelists will be keen to answer your questions and as well. But first, while we're waiting for those questions to come in from the audience, I have a question for you, Silva. We know that multicultural community leaders play a critical role in building community resilience, and this extends to leaders who aren't in formal paid leadership roles. Would you like to share a little bit about how your organisation has engaged with these leaders?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Juanita. So during the pandemic, there was funding available through the Department of Premier and Cabinet and then DFFH for various agencies and organisations to recruit bicultural workers who were paid through these organisations. Community champions were also part of the network and continue to be part of the network, and were in unpaid roles. However, they did receive an honorarium through the funding phase. Post-funding, we are able to continue our engagement quite successfully with network members, and we use a number of different avenues to do this. So first and foremost, at the core of the network is ongoing consultation. So we really take a community-led approach to ensure that our engagement is relevant, and I think that's so important. So we do this by holding planning days to really understand the issues that are relevant to community leaders and their communities, which they volunteer and work within. And currently, as I mentioned before, we do understand that these issues are around mental, physical, social, economic, and environmental health. Multicultural community engagement network members in turn regularly hold consultations, both formal and informal, with community to understand their needs and challenges and bring that back to the network for further discussion and also the tailoring of resources and supports. In addition to this, we hold capacity building workshops. So each fortnight we hold a meeting where we bring together network members for discussions, support, a way of connecting. And in addition to that, we invite guest speakers which attend and they present on various topics, and these topics are guided by network members. In addition to this, we provide additional opportunities for training, and some of these have included first aid training by Community First Responders Australia, mental health first aid training, podcast training by SBS, and also plain language training led by the Enliven Plain Language team. So again, these are in direct response of what we hear from network members. In terms of communication, we prepare and send out weekly emails, and that's really a platform where we can showcase community events. We can provide information relevant to network members and their communities. We collaborate on various projects, and I think this is quite central as well. So at Enliven, together with partners, we apply for various funding opportunities and then call out to network members for an expression of interest to join those projects as a paid opportunity. For example, recently Enliven completed the Multicultural Heat Heroes in Action project, which was funded by the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, and this involved community leaders undertaking training to increase their capacity and capability in heatwave resilience. They facilitated focus group consultation with community members and used that to inform, produce and disseminate information through community information sessions. And lastly, and very importantly, we recognise and support the network. So at every opportunity, such as this one here that's been afforded to us, and we thank you very much, we acknowledge and advocate for the network and recognise the ongoing support of network members, not only in attending the initiatives and the meetings and informing projects, but also for everything that they do day in, day out with their communities. So thank you.
Thanks, Silva. I love the idea of heat heroes. Sounds very catchy, but also so important because we know that heat is, one of the biggest problems in terms of disaster impacts and, causes many fatalities, unfortunately, across our state. So great to be focusing there, and also to see the really wide range of activities, podcasts, training, gathering that you're doing, as well as kind of more paid formal funding opportunities. Thank you. A question for you, Angela. Why do you think collaboration between community members, community organisations, and emergency management and government is particularly important in supporting people who experience higher risk during disasters?
I did talk a little bit about this before, but I think it's really important, the answer to this, and maybe I don't have the time to talk about everything today, but I really think we're just more likely to be able to overcome challenges and gaps together and find solutions. But actually, we're also more likely to find gaps in each other's approach, perhaps, as well, and call each other out maybe on that I think is quite important. So if I use an example of this, we found some gaps working with providers that had emergency plans for clients that really relied solely on being able to call an ambulance and take them to hospital, for example. And we know that's not always realistic, particularly in a disaster. I mean, hospitals are very full and ambulances are busy. So I understand that can be a plan that can maybe work in some situations, but in large scale sort of disasters or small disasters, that might not. So we need to look at, what else can we do? So that's what the Emergency Planning Advice Service has been trying to work on together, so that we can, I suppose, reduce those problems for the individual when disaster strikes. We had that in Black Summer, people sitting in ambulances waiting, and then they had nowhere to go, so turning them around and sending them back home, which was not ideal either. So if we can have some really good preparedness plans in place that are workable plans, they actually mean that person has somewhere safe and suitable for them to go if they need to leave because of fire, because of flood. So and they can often be more complex when there is planned reliance on others. Does that make sense? So this is for people who they might have other support needs. They might need carers to support them. So there's a little bit more involved, but that's okay. We can do this, and if we work together, we can do it quite well. And that's what my hope and dream is for EPAS, in a scalable model across the state to support people with that approach. Does that make sense, Juanita?
It does. Yes, it does. And what a beautiful hope as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. There's a level of predictability, and then in the unpredictability of a disaster scenario, isn't there? And so, as you've been talking about building relationships, understanding what already exists in the community in terms of pathways to different types of supports or flexible supports, or perhaps not the A grade, response option, but that there is a B and a C plan as well, seems to be part of what you're talking about too.
And I noticed, that came up again in a recent fire we had in the Hills, in the Montrose fire community, saying, well, what about, the neighbours saying, what about the older people who can't evacuate, who's going to get them out? And I'm like, well, maybe that's you, that you are the first responders as the neighbours, as the community closer by. We all have a role to play. So I know we talk about it as shared responsibility, but what is my share of the responsibility, and trying to better understand what that actually means. And if you do have people local to you that might struggle to respond to an emergency the way all us emergency services want you to, because we won't have our messages. So I say, do this. But what if you can't? And if you know somebody who might not be able to, taking on board some of that responsibility, perhaps as a community, working with, emergency services on that. So I think we've got definitely improve in this space. And I agree with that enabler 1 of the report, Lucy, about the importance of those local relationships. I know there was more to it, but yeah, definitely, like you said, we need those building those local relationships and nourishing that trust has an impact when disaster actually strikes.
Yeah. Thanks, Angela.
Okay.
And a question for you, Amanda. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the mentoring and peer support work that you've been involved in with community health organisations, and how can you just talk a little bit about the mentoring and peer support and how that learning can be facilitated in an ongoing way?
Yeah, so my team have had experience with disaster from the fires, and in October 22, the floods happened, and ERV was standing up local service providers, which we all know takes time because you've got to employ staff. They've got to go do the onboarding process. So there was a delay in them getting up and running. And a disaster space, as we know, is a very different field to work into our normal community services stuff. So some of those services were a little bit lost because I didn't know where to start. So having experienced disaster workers, helping them out to understand the things that they need to be looking for with clients, where to go to for those supports. So, because our biggest issue is insurance companies. They don't like to work well with clients at times. So having somebody with that knowledge to bounce ideas off, share ideas with, or ask for some support in knowing where to go to get that help for your clients. But also acting as a go-between between government, whether it's council, state government, federal government, people trust community service organisations. So the collaboration between clients, government and community service organisations makes it the journey a little bit easier for our clients. I think the biggest issue in that space is the short-term funding that we have, and losing that experience and knowledge as people move on, as funding comes to an end, or the program is being wound up for different events. So that's really important, that because you lose that collaboration. My team will still reach out to the other services we've used in the fires to do secondary consult. My team have offered support with other agencies that are using the disaster star, the outcome star that was co-designed by Gippsland Lakes during or just after the fires, because we use outcome stars to measure clients' journey. We didn't have one that fitted, which is why we worked with Triangle in the UK to develop a new star that is around that disaster. So collaboration happens on various platforms and across various organisations, and I think it's the best outcome for clients is that collaboration approach.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. It's interesting you talk about insurance companies and their conduct. We hear that a lot, and I'm interested. Many, I assume, on this call will be aware of the inquiries and other kind of reviews that happened after the 2022 floods, recognising that many community members, particularly low income householders, really struggled with their engagement with insurance, and indeed I think some still struggling to get back on their feet and into homes. Do you think that there's a sense as well that some of those things would have been expected by funders to have been resolved in a timely way by now, but things are lingering on and on in ways that perhaps funders and others were not expecting, the drag out on some of those things?
Yeah, I think so. Like during the fires, we had financial counselling dedicated to the disaster, same as community legal, that wasn't necessarily rolled out to the same extent in other events. But the collaboration between those services and even the council with the Rebuild Support Service helps streamline things, and it puts a focus on supporting the clients through that journey and gaining better outcomes. I know from working with financial counselling in the bushfire space and them understanding the insurance side of things a lot better than what we do, because that's not what we do. It resulted in the East Gippsland community getting an increase of approximately another $4 million from insurance payouts, because they were there to advocate and support our clients alongside us to help get those better outcomes for clients. And it hasn't been there in some of the other disasters to the extent it was in the bushfires. And I get that, you know, they're different events, but that collaboration really needs to happen to get the best outcome for clients.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. If I could bring Angela back, I've got a question from the audience for you, Angela, and thank you. You can feel free, panelists, to keep your cameras on if you wish, but also happy to turn on and off if that's what you prefer.
They might know the answer as well.
We might be able to collaborate on an answer.
Exactly.
So the question for you, Angela, is in relation to the program that you've been speaking about, the EPAS program. The question is, was that program focused on broadly kind of community resilience, or was that program working more at that individual or case-by-case basis, or perhaps a little bit of both?
That's a really good question. Thank you. So it is the Emergency Planning Advice Service uses is a vehicle and uses person-centered emergency preparedness, which is has a framework and tools for that individual approach to work with that individual in a person-centered way to understand their lives and then move through that process. Then what does that mean in an emergency? So it's a great tool, but it's not the good thing about it is that actually step 4 in the PSEP framework and tool is about communicating and working, I suppose, with others if there are gaps and barriers, and communicating that plan. And in that process, it actually does build more, I would say, at the community level, more resilience, because there's lots of people usually involved in the plan that need to know about it. And that can include neighbours, that can include carers, informal and formal carers, providers. So it was a really interesting process to actually go through with providers. And I think Amanda or Silva on the line, you might find this really interesting, that when we had a provider involved at an individual level, so at the home, and we're, like I said, through Jill's case study before, we're just working through that together. They then took those learnings and then applied it to their other clients. So you built more of like a ripple effect. So in that way, I'd say you are building more of a community resilience, or you're building capability in a way with providers, and then realizing, oh, we can do this. We can learn from this and take this. So we have evidence of that from the pilot, which was really interesting. I think we'd need to do more of it at scale to really build the resilience. But what I would also say is it's quite stressful to leave people behind in an emergency, right? So we're targeting those people in the community that are likely to be left behind. Like Jill, she has no transport. She actually didn't trust her neighbours that much. She didn't have family close by. So if we can have plans with them that work, and if it is in the case of a bushfire, a leave plan, or even if it is a plan that they can stay in place for another emergency, then that other people know that they're safe and they don't have to come in to support, that can also build and reduce, I suppose, the disaster risk on others. So I think even though we are focusing on the individual level, it actually has benefits beyond. Does that make sense? Both for we notice for the providers involved, but also for family and community involved. I could share some other stories, but I'm going to run out of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela. That's great. And I think the question, there was a little extra part of the question as well, and maybe we
Sure.
can follow this up afterwards with some with some suggestions, but also just in terms of training as well. So
Yes.
yeah, if you have any recommendations for training, etc. But there is another question that I'd like to just cheekily get in there on the training issue, and perhaps other panelists might wish to also chip in. The question is around the sorts of training that you would recommend for emergency management staff to prepare them to work with individuals with particular needs. And the question speaks specifically around psychosocial disabilities or other people with disabilities. What sorts of training, as I say, would you do and recommend?
Do you want me to answer? Maybe the others can also. I'd like to hear
The
Amanda.
question was for you, but I'm thinking others will also
I think we need to
have.
hear what they've probably got some great recommendations. So for those who delivered our emergency planning advice service, that household service we piloted, we developed a training package that centered around, I think there was 5 core modules, one of which was disability awareness. And we used the DARU disability awareness training package. It's about a 2-hour long e-learning module. We found that to be the most beneficial and holistic, I suppose. So we used that. We also had Daru come and present at our training sessions and ask people, that people could ask any questions. And I thought that was really helpful for our members who might have not as much experience with working with people with a diverse range of disabilities. So that was really useful. We also did a session around with older, because then we've got older people we also work with. So we had some training specific to that. And then also PCEP, the approach. So I think they're probably the 3 main parts that really mattered to build emergency services skills in that area. But what was really interesting was that they used those skills not just for people that they were working with through EPAS, but it transformed like a lot of their community engagement, if that makes sense. Because it was, you build like empathy, which is pretty important to have.
Very much so. I want to give an opportunity to Amanda or Silva to also chip in on any reflections you have around the sorts of training or capacity building for emergency management personnel that might help the collaborations work well in your communities.
Juanita, I think one thing that all personnel should do, doesn't across the board, would be that trauma-informed approach, that trauma-informed practice, because in some roles it can be lacking, and that can have a negative impact.
Thanks, Amanda. And Silva, perhaps some reflections for you. I know you've worked a lot with multicultural communities too. So any reflections?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Vanessa. And leading on from what Amanda mentioned as well, I think that's really very, very important. In addition to that, we do talk about cultural competency or cultural awareness training as well. So it's really important to have that. Again, it's that 2-way communication and that comes through building of trust, and that comes through time. And, really investing that time and that effort into understanding different cultures, and also the nuances within each culture as well and each community. I think if we can do that, and if we can support that, then our policies, approaches are not only are culturally sensitive to community needs in the different communities, and I think that really can only be a positive thing. In one particular project that we have just delivered, we worked with multicultural community engagement officers to put together a cultural manual, which was very well received, and that was really around what are some of the very important considerations and the etiquettes around engaging with different communities, understanding that of course every individual is different, but at a community level. So that was received really well. Thank you.
Thanks. We are nearly out of time, so I'm going to just ask each of you as a final short question, if you'd like to identify one key improvement that you'd like to see in the way we support collaborations for disaster resilience in Victoria. Can I throw to you first, perhaps Amanda? We'll go Amanda Silver, then Angela.
Thanks for that. I think probably one thing that is that ongoing funding across the board to keep that collaboration and that knowledge that it isn't lost. And having dedicated services. I know our community legal, the financial counsellors are funded for specific events. They need to have that disaster team all the time, because it, along with the rebuild support service in councils, to help streamline things and kind of fast track the recovery for clients.
Thanks, Amanda. Silva.
Great, thank you. I think from my perspective, it's that funding and resources to enhance community-led initiatives. We can see so many great things that come out of that collaboration when community are involved and it is community-led. And I think that really forges the pathway for those partnerships and collaboration, and not duplicating efforts and not duplicating services. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Silva. And finally, Angela.
Well, I love all the enablers in the report, actually. I think they're all very true. But like I said before, that first one resonates or sits with me. I think the strongest is building those relationships of trust. And I really actually loved what Lucy said earlier about, well, how do we make that more of a focus or an outcome, that we have built these relationships? We seem to think that's the fluffy stuff on the side, but actually it really matters. So I'm going to take on board what you said, and I might even write it into my next project about how do you measure the value in those relationships, because I think that's what this work has shown, that they are so critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, we need to measure it to recognize that it's there or included in some way. It's work. It's actual real work to create relationships, and it's skilled work too, often undervalued and hidden, but definitely real work, real community work. So I think that's a great way to leave the panel. Thank you so much, all three of you, for your contributions today. Very generous of you to give up your time and expertise for the benefit of all of us on this webinar. And thank you also for your contributions to the report itself and the process for its development. So that we're nearly at time. So I just want to thank as well everyone for joining us today from wherever lands you've joined from. I hope that you found something useful and inspiring in the case studies and in the discussion we've had today. Apologies that we haven't got to all the questions. I think some of them came in kind of thick and fast at the end there. So we've dealt with the questions that we could, but apologies to those who did not have their question asked, and we'll endeavour to provide information and responses that will be useful to you all, including the full report, which I think Julianne has just posted in the chat, and we very much encourage everyone to have a good look at it and to share it widely. So you can read more about each of these case studies and others in the Collaboration for Disaster Resilience report, which you can access in full on the VCOSS website, and it's also in the chat link. I want to do a massive shout out to the VCOSS team who were involved in the development of this work and in this launch event today, particularly Lucy Mann, who you heard from earlier, and also Meg Brody, who is leading our Thriving Communities team at VCOSS, within that's the portfolio that this work sits in. I also want to acknowledge Julianne Tice and Amy Houston today for tech support on this event, and of course to Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and the Community Connector for Resilience collaboration, which has supported the funding supported with funding to do this work. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that this report launch is really the start of our work in this Collaboration for Disaster Resilience space. And to build our communities, we're going to need help and support and a recognition of the work that we do to establish partnerships that can be flexible and responsive and address local needs. So please do read the report. Please get in touch with VCOSS and continue this conversation. You can contact Lucy on the details that will go up in the chat now. And we'd also very much appreciate it if you could complete a short survey, which should pop up pretty much now, I believe. So thank you again, everyone, for being with us today. Have a wonderful day and see you soon.